Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and I am excited today to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is technology and data. And in particular, I'll be talking about how to leverage data and technology with the new changes happening with generative AI. I get asked all the time, what are the best tech tools? Which are the best models? And I'll address some of those questions today. But again, this is more from an enterprise perspective, not so much from a consumer perspective. So this is really about how organizations are going to be doing this. So let's see, let's get going here. A couple things. First of all, if you could share how you are prepared your data and technology inside your organization to be able to use generative AI. We're going to talk a lot today about the state of affairs of data and tech. And as you can imagine, it's not a pretty picture inside of most organizations. So I keep talking to leaders, CIOs, of course, but also CEOs, operating people, people in marketing. And it's all about like, what is my data? What does it look like? And how do I prepare and get into shape? And then on top of it, how do we think about tech? So a lot of things to cover today. So please chime in, say where you're coming from today. And Jay has beaten me to the punch here again. I share my slides with him. I do have slides today. So let me put those into the feed too as well. Someday I'm going to figure out why I can't post onto LinkedIn. All right, until that day comes, thank you, Jay. All right, so these are my slides for today. I do want to talk about how this is very much a foundational idea, that you can use data and tech and set up a really strong foundation for generative AI success. And I think it takes some planning up front to think about this. So, and it doesn't have to be overly wrought and a lot of details, but we do need to think very strategically about what you're going to use, how you're going to develop your technology. Because there's a lot going on. There are a lot of consultants, a lot of tech companies who would love, love, love to sell you a lot of technology. And that may not be the right move for you right now. So we'll talk about a couple things. So a couple things. First of all, why is this so important to think about it? And generative AI is only as powerful as the data and the processes that the technology enables. So let me just say again, generative AI can only work if the data is in a way that it can be used and that the technology can actually use that data. And so if data is the fuel for your generative AI engine, then technology is your engine itself. And so both need to be operating really well. And just some data points here is that 70% of top performing organizations in a recent McKinsey study said that they have challenges integrating data. Surprise, surprise. They talk about issues like data quality, governance, the processes about who can use what data, and then also just not having enough data. And then let me just close this banner so you can see it. And then also a third of executives from a Deloitte study said that they lacked confidence in the results because the technology that they're concerned is that the data wasn't ready and that the technology infrastructure just wasn't going to be there to support the kind of things that they wanted to have it come out to be doing. So again, this leads to a lot of problems. So the way we think about this, Katja Walsh, my co-author for the book, Winning with Generative AI, is how do you think about data and technology? And the questions we get all the time are these: do we need perfect data? And as Katja will say, as a chief data officer, as a chief AI officer, perfect data is like the ultimate unicorn. It just doesn't exist. So how do we avoid overwhelming tech investments? How do we make sure we don't overspend on technology that may be obsolete? And then also, how do we scale quickly and still at the same time stay very secure and also compliant? So we get a lot of questions from CISOs, for example, on how to do this, because we're talking about your company's data. So we're going to get into all of this. So the data itself, let's talk about data first, and then we'll talk about technology. So the technology is, again, the AI just runs on data, loves data, just eats it up. So the better the data, the more powerful it is. And the thing is, you don't need perfect data. You need the right data. And I'll say that again, it's not about having the perfect data, it's having the right data and making sure that right data is managed effectively. And so I want to take a moment and just talk about this whole need to have perfect data. I oftentimes hear this from CIOs and people who have been traditional guardians of that data, and with good reason, because their job is to make sure it's as accurate as possible for the systems to use and to safeguard it, make sure it's secure, that it isn't used, gotten access to for nefarious reasons. So so there's a lot of protection that IT and data will put against this. And the challenge is that you want to get access to it. You may need to manipulate it, to put it into different formats so that AI can use it. And then that's where the fireworks begin. And so aligning around what you want to do with the data, the technology you want against your strategy is absolutely essential so that everyone can understand this is what we're trying to achieve and this is what we want to use the data for. Now, one of the things about having the right data is it's interesting about the state of the data. I was speaking with one CEO, and what she was saying was we had all this great data on a big AI project we wanted to do with generative AI, but it wasn't going to be ready for another 6 months. But then we had the smaller project that was also important for our strategy, but wasn't such a big thing. And we realized our data was really good. It was really well structured. We could just immediately put it to use. So even though it wasn't a top priority for them, they started working with that data set again, experimenting with generative AI, figuring out how to make it work, how to manipulate the data, how to work with their systems, work with their CISO, work with the data team, security, to make sure that everyone understood what was happening where. And so I think that's a really good lesson that you can start with the data that you have and then also work on the data that you know is going to be essential to get it into the shape that's ready for generative AI. But I would not put off using generative AI to find some solutions, even in the short term, these quick wins are important to demonstrate ROI, but more importantly, is to build collaboration across the organization and also to build your confidence in your ability to use data and to use the technology. So let me get back into the slides here and talk about thinking about your data. So what is data? And most people think about these large databases of customers and their information, but it's more than just the spreadsheets and your data sets. It's also all the recordings that you have of meetings potentially, of your call center transcripts. If you are using sensors, Internet of Things, IoT sensors, if you're having computer vision, all of this highly unstructured but very valuable data potentially could be the right data that you need to accomplish your strategy. So the magical thing about generative AI is that it can connect all these disparate pieces of data in ways that you could never imagine. And again, your connections of this data is where breakthrough happens. So I encourage you to think about data in a very, very wide way for your organization. And in particular, thinking about what could be data that could be very useful for you to accomplish your most important strategic goals because it probably exists, but not in a format or a way that AI can use it or even access it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So I see a couple comments here. I'm just going to go through and make sure. Okay, Jay is going to share how they are actually preparing. So we are collecting as much data as we can get to use in building AI models. We are taking out any identifying information, though. So very important, great point to make that you can have data, personally identifiable information, PII, and you want to make sure that you strip it out before you give it to a model, even if it's a proprietary model that's on a cloud server that's dedicated to you, etc. You want to just take that out for all the manipulations. You don't want that out there. And Jay is joining from Rockford, Illinois. Thank you so much for joining, Jay. Always great to have you here. Let's see. We have Devin. Our event was focused on AI last year. This year, we're focused on mastering the balance. This topic is spot on. Thank you, Devin. I would love to hear more about some of the topics around what you're trying to balance with your event. All right, so good. Keep the comments coming. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right, lots of materials to get through. Let me get back to the slides. All right, so there are 3 pillars of data strategy that we've been working on. The first one is to identify and prioritize the right data. So not all data is created equal. And so you want to focus on the data that provides either the highest value or the highest risk. And I just have this very simple matrix of across the top, low risk and high risk, and along the left-hand side, high value and low value. So clearly you have something with high value and low risk, go for it. Again, there was this data that I talked about. The CEO said it was just sitting right there. We were pretty comfortable with it. It wasn't really essential data, but it was really well structured and we could do something with it. So go and optimize that right away for generative AI. And then there's the next bucket, which is a high value, but also high risk. So these are the places where you want to govern, make sure that you have those governance and protections and controls in place, and then prioritize in terms of your data. Again, clean up your data, correction, all your focus on getting the right data into the right shape. Again, things that are low value, you just don't want to, again, if it's high risk and low value, you want to make sure you're governing it, making sure that the data has the protections around it to make sure it's secure and who can use it for what, but then deprioritize the use of that data in your use of it for generative AI. And clearly low risk, low value, well, you don't have to pay much attention to it. You don't need as much controls around it, but it's also a low priority. So it's a nice way to be thinking about your data and how you want to be using it, identify and prioritize the right data for the purposes that you're trying to create. So the second area is to make sure that governance is usable. Otherwise, if it's governance that just shuts things down and the data is not in a place in a way that it is usable, then that's going to be a dead end. So it needs to be discoverable, accessible, and contextualized. And let me give you the example of this. Think about your library. If it was just a pile of books in there, it's not very useful to people who are coming in. Versus if it's organized and categorized and shelved and neatly accessible on these bookshelves and with wide open aisles, then anyone coming in looking for a particular book can go find it. And so that's the way to think about your data. It's a library, it's organized. One example was one organization took a lot of time to organize their customer data across multiple channels so that there were consistent channels, consistent data across them so they could figure out who it was. And the data, the metadata is really what is it, where is it, and how can I use it? So that metadata is sitting there on top of the data store that explains what it is. So it's easy to understand what rights and governance goes around that. And then also very important here is you want to have some universal definitions. And this is where that usability is very important. Who's a customer? Is it a customer that who has transacted with you? Is it a potential person? Is it a person who no longer has purchased with you, but may have done years ago, but is still referring you to people? If you're a very low incidence product, for example, like bed mattresses, for example, you don't buy them very often, but there's very high referral value. What is a sale, for example? Are returns considered sales? What about sales that are on credit, but you haven't received the cash for? So these definitions are very important, and you'll find that they are different depending on the organization, the business unit, even departments and regional locations. So making sure your definitions for what it is becomes a very important step to usability. I want to talk about the third data, and then we'll go in and talk a little bit more about, see what other questions and comments we have here. So the third area is around organizing the data. And I was actually asked once, so now that we have generative AI that can just understand unstructured data, can we stop looking at taxonomies? And it was sort of tongue in cheek. I'm like, no, no, no. You actually need taxologies and also ontologies. Again, taxonomies, very clear categories, information can exist in all of those. Ontologies are really good at looking at related content. So looking at data that is related to each other. So think about Spotify as an ontology where a music may be classified, but it's also showing its relationship to similar types of music. And then ensuring that the data is high quality and is also complete. So, for example, if the name says John Smith, but in other places is J. Smith, just the first initial, or in some other places, it's just the first name and not the last name. So you're getting this incomplete profile of somebody and the quality is again not necessarily the same. So making sure that you have these translation tools inside the data sets to make sure that the information is all normed to a standard across your organization. And then two other quick things. The more you can automate the pipelines that feed the data and keep it out of being a manual process, the better off you will be. Trust me on this, is that when it's a manual process, if there are a number of steps that you can do, that a human can do, it can oftentimes lead to mistakes. It doesn't happen, people forget. So the more you can automate the process, the better off you will. And then also anticipate what your future needs are going to be. If you have this plan again for generative AI that reaches out into the future, I talked about it last week to have an 18-month plan. If you can anticipate you're going to need certain types of data to support different types of initiatives, then put that into your plan for organizing your data, even if you don't have that data yet. So having that in a plan for your data strategy is extremely important. All right, I'm going to see if there are any comments here. Let me close off some of my areas and things. All right. Jay has a good question. What about creating a sandbox in parallel and encouraging experimentation? So we're going to talk about that in just a second. I think it's so important to be able to take your data and then be able to pull it out, experiment with it without impacting the data itself, and then also impacting your existing operations. So sandboxes, and I'll talk about this with the technology, the places where you can create this, section it off, all great ways to encourage experimentation. And again, to build confidence in your ability to manipulate the data with different types of tech. So let me get into that. Again, when the tech stack, again, I get asked all the time, what are the best tools? It's not about having the best tools, it's about having the right tools for the task that you want at hand. And you probably will be using multiple tools. So one of the things I do say that if you get the tech stack wrong, the best data is not going to save you. So 3 ways to develop your tech stack: start small and focus on immediate ROI. I can't emphasize this enough. This is less about pulling out the complete and total end all be all generative AI stack. And it is much more about developing just enough technology to meet the needs that you have right at this moment. And then you can anticipate the things that you're going to need because you have your plan, you have your strategy plan. And you can start knowing that if I'm going to be able to do this, what are the technologies that I need to have in place? And start thinking about that sequencing of technologies you need to bring on. We're going to talk about integrating, because you do not want to have tech bloat by having lots of different things on top of each other. And then also experimentation. We'll talk about how to build that agile foundation with your tech stack. So the first area, starting small. Start simple. One high value, low risk project, according to that data metrics. Again, it could be something simple like automating your meeting summaries and then sending them out to people, or taking a first draft pass at marketing content. Pick something really simple that that accesses your existing data, does something with it, and returns a result. So there are a lot of no-code tools. I am a big user of Zapier because I can take one set of data that exists someplace or coming out a particular platform and connect it to another one. And I can do this without knowing any programming. Jasper, again, a great content writing tool and marketing tools, also very good at this, taps into your existing marketing assets and then does things with it. The reason I encourage you to look at these types of tools is that it does not require any engineering resources, very minimal, if any at all. And so, for example, one retailer used a chatbot to handle various return FAQs by just integrating a tool with Zapier, and reduce a call volume by 25%. So there are things you can do right up front that you can experiment with. You can start small. Don't think that it's like this is so insignificant, it doesn't matter. And again, it may be just this quick win for you to get comfortable, and your organization to get comfortable with AI accessing proprietary data inside your organization. The second thing is to integrate, and making sure that the tools that you select to start using are compatible, are scalable, and aligned with your goals. And notice I don't say align with your existing technology. It's aligned with your goals, your strategic goals. The reason why, if you do this, if you look at integration only through the lens of your existing technology, you may be limiting yourself. So think about what will be compatible, what will be able to be aligned and integrated with your existing platforms, but don't be limited by it because you might be able to use these tools as a standalone, be able to integrate the results with other things. But again, it's really much more about how do they work with each other as well as working with your existing platforms. So middleware tools, again, as I mentioned, Zapier, but also MuleSoft are really good at connecting all of these different systems, connecting workflows, and reducing all of that manual intervention that I mentioned is so important. And then what you want to do is conduct an audit to identify places where there are these redundant and siloed tools, and you can use these tools to streamline and integrate them in ways that you may not have in the past. So, in particular, this one company, a logistics company I was working with, it looked at how to integrate generative AI with their ERP systems, and it analyzed real-time delivery data and found places where they could streamline things and reduce their cost by 15%. So, just again, significant ways to do that. Finally, let's talk about experimentation. To Jay's point, this is about supporting flexible testing and experimentation. So these sandboxes really check and see if these sandboxes can be created. And again, fairly easy for you to section off part of your AI to just be, again, not going anywhere, but you can experiment with it. And there are a lot of partners who can help you do this. I, for example, love 11 Labs to do voice generation, fun things you can do with it that you never could have imagined. And I love the repository of transformers and of models that already exist within Hugging Face. Again, you can just go in there, see what are the existing experiments that people are doing, and just get them. You don't have to start from scratch. There are lots of open APIs from OpenAI, Azure, AWS, the usual suspects that can connect you very quickly and easily into a model. Again, these are all ways to make it simple and easy for you to get started by creating that sandbox. And we get asked, should we be using off the shelf models or creating custom models? And the key question to ask is, does this technology solution help us differentiate? If it doesn't, if it's something that's operational, then use an off the shelf solution. And that's what I recommend you doing right from the very beginning. Don't start with the custom solutions. Start with something that is off the shelf that you can use and see value from and learn how to connect the data and the tech with your operations. Then you can go, after you've learned that, after you've built that, you can be so much more knowledgeable to build the custom solutions. And you may find that you don't need a custom solution if something already exists. So I want to show you just graphically how this works because I ask a lot of times, when should we be developing something more custom for ourselves? So level one is here. You can use off-the-shelf generative AI platforms. It basically says, here's a user interface, a chatbot, to a model. And you might be able to, for example, have people use different models or different types of the same model. So very expensive ones that do chain of thought, for example, with the new OpenAI version of 4.10. So that's very different than being able to use a very low, inexpensive open source to handle some other type of tasks. So you have some flexibility even right here at this point to if there's a certain task that you want and build a chatbot for, it uses different models. So think about this model on the back end as something you can swap in and out depending on what you're asking people to do. And that chatbot interface can be separate from that model. So you can switch it back and forth on the back end. Now, the second level is when you're starting to customize it with your own data. So you want to attach it to your data. And something that I find a lot of organizations are starting to do is to put a query router right in front of that data. So the request comes in, the question comes in from the user, and it goes into your chatbot, and then it goes to another AI, and it understands what that question is, and then says, oh, based on that question, I understand it. It should tap this data, takes that data, points it to it, and gives it to the model that then knows what to do with that data. Asking an AI model to do all of that is a lot of heavy lifting. And the reason why this also works really well is that you can swap out the model. You can use a different model depending on advances that happen and change. And as we see, There are new announcements for models every single week. So being able to swap out the model back and forth without having to touch this proprietary query router and your proprietary data is extremely valuable. So using the query router to tap into your databases and takes that entire package, gives it to the model, and then the model spits out the answer. Now, the third version is when you have an agent. I think of it as a critic that sits between the model and the response. So you have all the query routers and the databases. When the model comes back with an answer, there's a critic, an AI that sits in front of that model before it reaches the user who asks the question and says, is this a good answer? And so it's a way to deal with the hallucinations, to build trust in the model, and you train it with that critic to say, this is the way you want to start answering the questions correctly. So quality is a very subjective thing. And right now we have humans in the loop to be able to answer, is this good quality? Is it not before we use it? And to scale AI, you want to be able to have that critic in place to be able to give the model the feedback and even sometimes ask it to run the information again and do it in this way. So this is a very quick way of looking at how your tech stack could be evolving and a way to think about building it up in a modular way to get the best responses for your organization. As you can imagine, this is a highly iterative process. It is something that has to happen over and over again in multiple ways. So to get started, make sure your data and your tech are aligned with your strategy. All your strategies around data and tech have to be aligned with your overall strategy. And then empower your team to innovate. Within the structure of that strategy, then say, these are the guardrails, go for it. Start with that simple single initiative and test. And I'm going to challenge you to do it this week. Find a particular problem. And this is the question to ask: what is the most underutilized data source or untapped technology in our organization? And then figure out how to use it differently. It's not to say it's going to go into production right away. It's not even to say it's going to be successful. But I think the sooner you can experiment with taking data that isn't being used, along with all of this incredible, powerful generative AI technology, and marry the two together and experiment with it, the better off you're going to be. So this is my contact information as I put out. I'm trying a new system here called TalkDot. And again, you can scan the QR code and get the slides, or you can use the URL that is, let me just put that up here. There, I know it's hard to copy and paste from the screen, but I believe it should be in the comments on the feeds so that you can copy it from the screen too as well. So that's what I have for today. I do want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be. Oh, let me look at see if there are any comments here. Any other ones? I don't see any other ones right now, so we're good. I do want to talk about what will be my next topic. I'm taking next week off because it's Thanksgiving. We'll be visiting family, and I hope that you all have a great Thanksgiving too if you're in the US. But join me in 2 weeks on December 3rd at 9 o'clock again, our usual time, and we'll be talking about leadership and culture and how they are changing with generative AI, and especially organizations that are putting in very transformative generative AI strategies. So we'll talk about how leadership as culture is changing, how you can anticipate that, and also how you can start getting ahead of that change and preparing your people for the change that's coming with generative AI. So let's see, I think that's it for now. Oh, here we go. Okay, that's the same one we talked about before. All right, I think we are set. Thank you again for joining. That was a lot of content that I threw at you. Please stay in touch. I would love to hear how you are using your tech and your data, how you're structuring it and preparing it for generative AI. Again, this is how I learn. I really appreciate the comments and your time spending here today to talk about things. Wish you all the best and do that experiment this week. I want to hear what happened. What did you try? Did it work? Did it not work? What's working for you? What are your successes so we can celebrate those too? So again, please stay in touch, experiment, have fun, stay safe out there. Bye-bye.